Hello everybody, I'm Michelle Windridge. I'm the National Education Lead for Early Years Schools here at Twinkl. I am talking this evening about a subject very close to my heart as an ex-reception teacher and an ex-Key Stage 1 teacher. And I'm not doing it alone. I am joined by the fabulous Chloe Jones, who is a current Year 1 teacher. She's hiding, she's got her camera off. I think she's waiting for the element of surprise when she comes to her a little bit later on. Chloe and I actually met at the gates of number 10 Downing Street when we were there to support the handing in of the Plays Learning petition for Play to become statutory in Key Stage 1. So I'm really delighted she's here. Okay, so we're going to start off. Before we think about strategies, we're just going to take a moment to reflect. Is transition to Year 1 really working in your school? Every September, children experience a significant change. Alongside a new classroom and often new adults, sometimes comes higher expectations, longer periods of sitting, more adult-directed learning, increased independence, and in many schools, fewer opportunities to play. I'll never forget my daughter coming home after her first day in Year 1 saying, "We don't play anymore, Mummy," and it was really heartbreaking to hear. Think for a moment about your own setting. Which children tend to thrive during this transition? Is it those that are already confident, resilient and self-regulated? Now consider which children often tend to struggle. Often it's not always about academic ability. Children with SEND, those with English as an additional language, summer-born children, or those who simply need more time to adjust, can find the increased demands in Year 1 particularly challenging. Finally, I'd like you to reflect on one important question. What assumptions do we make about being Year 1 ready? Now, I am very aware that I'm probably preaching to the converted already here. The fact that you're here means that you probably work within early years or Year 1 or Year 2 and are aware of this big debate and aware of sort of the pushes and pulls in both directions. But consider, do we expect children to adapt to the system? Or should we be asking the system to adapt to meet the children's developmental needs? Throughout this session, I'd like us to shift our thinking away from asking, are our children ready for Year 1? And try to think, is Year 1 ready for the children? That change in perspective can have a powerful impact on children's transitions, on their well-being and long-term success. So when we think about transition, it's easy to focus on the child, but it's equally as important to recognise how much the learning environment can change. In reception, typically, children experience a balance of child-initiated learning, continuous provision, flexible routines, and a pedagogy built around play. Learning is often active, practical, and responsive to the children's needs and developmental needs. Then, almost overnight, many children move into a very different environment. There may be more teacher-led lessons, increased times at tables, a more fixed timetable, and fewer opportunities to learn through play. For some children, this transition is manageable. For others, it's a significant shift, not because they're not capable, but because the way they're expected to learn has changed so dramatically. The challenge isn't simply moving to a new classroom, it's adapting to a completely different approach to learning. And as educators, we need to ask ourselves whether every one of these changes is necessary from day one, or whether we can create a more gradual transition that builds on the strengths of reception whilst preparing for Key Stage 1. The good news is that this isn't just opinion, it's supported by a growing body of research. As Ofsted states in the Best Start in Life research review, play is essential for children's development. Breaking news, it's essential. Importantly, play isn't an alternative to learning, it's a powerful vehicle for learning. Through high quality play, supported by skilled adults, children develop far more than academic knowledge. They're building confidence by taking risks and trying new things. They're developing language through rich conversations with adults and peers, and we know children are starting school with lower levels of speech and language than ever before. Their curiosity is nurtured as they explore, they question, they investigate. They strengthen their self-regulation by managing emotions, attention and behaviour, and they become better problem solvers. The Best Start in Life review highlights that high quality early education values children's play whilst using it intentionally to teach. So we're not saying year one needs to be exactly like reception, but it does need to be an extension of it before we can move on to more formal learning. So if we want children to bring these skills with them from the early years, we need to be focusing on how we can not reduce opportunities for play, but harness on them play-based activities so we can create a bridge between reception and year one. One of the biggest misconceptions about play is that if children aren't sitting quietly at tables, they aren't learning. Now, in reality, we know that some of the richest learning happens when children are actively engaged. During high quality play, children are constantly planning, reasoning, negotiating, and applying what they already know, solving problems and developing that executive function that underpins successful learning across the whole curriculum. So the learning may not always look the same as a worksheet or a written task, but quite often it's cognitively demanding. Children are making decisions, they're adapting their thinking, they're collaborating with others and regulating their behaviour, all skills for lifelong learning. And this isn't a new idea. In 2010, Fisher reminded us that what the child's development literature constantly tells us is that children should not be learning very differently in Key Stage 1 to how they were learning in the early years. So I suppose the question now is, if children shouldn't stop learning through play when they enter year one, how can we make sure that we're building on what they've learned in reception to make the most of the learning opportunities that they need to cover and the curriculum demands expected in year one? Okay, so sometimes when we observe children playing, it's really easy to see the activity rather than the learning. But if we look closely, we can see something very different. So a child mixing mud and water isn't just playing, they're being a scientist, they're making predictions, testing ideas and observing what happens. A child building with blocks is an engineer, they're exploring balance, stability and design. A child acting out stories becomes a storyteller and an author. Every time we ask questions and ask children to investigate and explore the world around them, they're becoming researchers. When we view play through this lens, we begin to see that children aren't stepping away from learning, but they're engaging in a deeper, meaningful learning that prepares them for successes in Key Stage 1 and beyond. Now, I've worked in year one. I do understand that sometimes we can go in with all this passion, but actually there are a lot of barriers, a lot of blockers stopping us from implementing this. And we'll come on to that in a little while. So quite often we'll think of transition as something that happens on the last day of term, and that day is nearly here. You're on the final stretch now, and on the first day in year one. Now, the reality is successful transition, it's a process, it's not a single event. It begins well before September. So during that summer term, reception and year one staff can work together. They can share planning, have regular communication and opportunities to understand each other's practice. Quite often we put lots and lots of effort and resources into that starting reception, starting school, and then maybe not quite as much when the children are starting year one. When I was a year one teacher, I'd always send them a welcome to year one pack, just like I did when I was a reception teacher, with photos on of where their pegs would be and things in the classroom that they could look at throughout the summer, just to keep in mind those changes that were going to happen. So the first half of the autumn term in year one, it should be viewed as a period of adaptation, where routines, expectations and the learning environments are introduced gradually, allowing children time to settle and build confidence. Quite often we can be under pressure from SLT to hit the ground running and start as we mean to go on, which I think comes from a good place. But ultimately, we know that child development doesn't happen that way. We know that children need a gradual approach to change. Most importantly, transition is everyone's responsibility. So it involves children, teachers, support staff, parents and carers, and school leaders working together with a shared understanding of what children need to thrive. When we see transition as an ongoing journey rather than a 1 or 2 day event, we're far more likely to create positive experiences that support the children's well-being, confidence, and long-term success. Okay, so one of the biggest myths about year 1 is that play has to stop. That's not what the evidence is telling us, and it's not what children need. The goal isn't for play to disappear, but it's also not for year 1 to just be a full day of continuous provision. We want the play to evolve. So as children move into year 1, the balance of learning naturally changes. There are new curriculum expectations and the increasing opportunities for whole class teaching. However, purposeful play continues to have a really important role in helping children to apply, deepen and consolidate their learning. So play in year 1 becomes more intentional. It involves opportunities for children to practice new skills, to problem solve, to collaborate with others and make meaningful links across the curriculum. It also allows teachers to observe children's understanding in authentic contexts and identify those next steps in learning. So rather than asking, when do we stop play after the transition to year 1, maybe we could consider, how can we use play purposefully to support children's success in year 1? When we make that shift in thinking, transition becomes a much smoother process because children continue to learn in a way that's developmentally appropriate. For example, when introducing or when exploring the part-whole model, does that need to be done on a worksheet and recorded in a workbook, or can the children do it practically on the carpet? Can they do it practically on their tables or wherever they want to do it? Can we give them the option of recording it with pens, pencils, with objects, or in a workbook, so that they're choosing how they approach it? We're making playful opportunities for learning really visible in our classrooms. So a common misconception is that when children are playing, the teacher's role is simply to supervise or stand back. In reality, we know that adults are central to making play a powerful learning experience. Skillful practitioners observe carefully to understand what children know, what interests them, and what they're ready to learn next. They ask thoughtful questions that encourage children to explain their thinking, to predict, to justify, and to reflect. They introduce new vocabulary, which is so important. They extend children's language and help them communicate increasingly complex ideas. They provide just the right level of challenge, scaffolding, and learning without taking over. It can be really tempting sometimes to do it for them, can't it? But just enough so we don't take over and so that the children remain active thinkers rather than passive learners. At the same time, they are constantly assessing learning through observation and interaction, using what they see to hear and what they hear to inform their future planning. So purposeful play isn't about leaving the children to play. It's about skilled adults creating, guiding and enriching learning opportunities that help every child progress. So if the evidence for developmentally appropriate transition is so strong, it's worth asking, why isn't every classroom in year 1 doing this? The reality is, as I'm sure you're aware, that there are genuine barriers. Teachers, we work within systems that can be heavily influenced by accountability measures, by curriculum expectations, and by making sure children are being prepared for future assessments. There are also practical challenges, and this is one that I really feel, because I had this a lot. Classroom space in Key Stage 1 may not lend itself to playful learning in quite the same way it did in reception. Workload can make redesigning the environment feel overwhelming. Quite often, we can be the only adult in year one with our class for the majority of the day. I know that we used to share, there were 3 year one classes and we shared a TA. So I was lucky if I got an hour a day in my year class, which can make it really challenging to try and implement that play-based learning, especially in the autumn term. These barriers, they're real, but they're not impossible. The aim isn't to recreate reception in year one overnight. It's just about making thoughtful, evidence-informed decisions. So just start small. If you're on your own with 30 children, you probably can't have a playful approach to absolutely everything straight away, but have a look at what the learning is that day. How could you implement small, playful opportunities throughout the day to make sure the children are a little bit more active than they would have been if you weren't doing that? Sometimes even small changes, purposeful enhancements, protecting opportunities for play, or gradually adapting routines can make a really significant difference to children's confidence, well-being, and learning during this transition. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the wonderful Chloe Jones, who is an experienced Key Stage 1 teacher, and she's an advocate for play in Key Stage 1. And Chloe, you're going to be sharing with us how you approach September, the autumn term and beyond in your class, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me on this webinar. I've been very excited about it. As you know, play is my bag and I could talk about it till I'm blue in the face. It's just the best thing, I think, or the best way that children can learn. I am a Key Stage 1 teacher. I currently work in year 1. I have worked in reception. I have worked in year 2, but I was put into year 1 to implement continuous provision. And I am very fortunate that we use this practice all year round, predominantly continuous provision, whilst also having those inputs that we can't get away from, like phonics. So yeah, I've been doing it now for full-time in year 1 for 2 years, I think. Before that, I was in reception. And here are some examples of my classroom. We are a 2-form entry and our provision runs around both classrooms and an outdoor area. So we cover pretty much every area of the national curriculum in our environment. For example, as you can see in one of the pictures, the top right, where it says snack, our children every week will pay for their snack and we will adjust the amount that they have to pay from, so they're having real life money experiences. Also, bottom left, our children are huge bakers, chefs. We grow our own food in the garden. They pick it, they write recipes for what they would like to make, but they also have the opportunity to independently cook every single day. Now, when they come to us in autumn, we will start with some easy recipes. They will read the instructions, they will follow the instructions, they will look at the measurements, and it's all independent. As we have moved forward, our children are given a weekly budget where they can make what they want, but they have to stick in their budget. Their budget is 20p a week, so we've got those number bonds to 20, constantly talking about those number bonds to 20 with the children, which is a key part of maths in year 1. We have construction blocks. We have blocks they are the same blocks that we have in reception that we also have in year 1, but they are what the children develop will be very different in year 1 to what they develop in reception. They are an open-ended toy. You might have in reception children building towers, but today I had some children building bridges, and then underneath the bridge they'd use the back of a puzzle as water because the back was blue, so they'd put the back of the puzzle underneath the bridge. So the creations they make are far more advanced than what they are in reception. Our we get asked a lot at our school, what does September look like for you? And honestly, it looks exactly the same as July. Our classrooms do not change an awful lot. So when our reception children move to us, they are incredibly familiar with the environment. It looks like reception, it feels like reception, but the resources in them are a step up from reception. The expectations are a step up from reception. And we are in the environment with the children all day, every day. Our job in that moment is, instead of sitting 30 children down to teach them how to use a map, is we will dive into their play and we will take out every part of learning from that one piece of play that we can. For example, we put in some really large pieces of paper. Our children created maps independently. Nobody suggested it. They made roads. They then included shops. They included the school. They labelled them. They had people. They then moved on and made an extension and had a zoo. And then they were sorting their animals into classification. None of that was taught. None of them were told to do that. They just did it, which is why, although it can be incredibly difficult to give the children the time that we so want to, we often find that if we don't give them enough time, they will never get into that deep level learning. And that deep level learning is where the children will take their learning probably far higher than I could have planned in an exclusively input taught session. The children are responsible for our resources. They are respectful with them. It feels like their classroom. They know it's their classroom. They treat it with respect, and they just thrive. Our transitions have been seamless because because year one has looked exactly like reception. There are some changes that you guys can make in your classroom if you feel that play is something you are incredibly passionate about, like me and Michelle are. As a minimum, keep provision until autumn term as a minimum. As I say, ours is all year round, but autumn term, you want to spend that time making valuable relationships, knowing your children, learning about them, and not managing the shock of a completely new classroom, a new school, as well as new staff. You could plan jointly with reception, see what they do, what can you implement into your classroom in autumn term that will feel familiar for the children. Observe reception before September if you're not comfortable, or if you're not confident in what you need to do. Observe reception, see what they do, ask for some advice. What have this cohort of children really enjoyed this year? I know I could speak to my year 2 teachers and say, my cohort have loved the blocks. They've loved it. So if you want to build those relationships and you want them to feel safe and comfortable, get some blocks in your environment. Play as an assessment. We are very fortunate that we don't do a huge amount of assessments. We don't actually have any writing books or maths books. Everything we do is in play. And yes, it's probably easier to sit all children down and say, can you label this plant for me? And I'm going to keep that bit of paper and I'm going to file it away, and that will tell me whether you can do it or not. But it's not purposeful. And more often than not, we find that if we do any form of writing assessment, the quality is far lower than the quality of writing that we see in provision. Maintain opportunities for choice. Let children have autonomy over what they would like to do or how they would like the class to feel, and teach through inquiry before recording. It's all about that connection. I know it can feel incredibly difficult going from EYFS to Key Stage 1, because you've all of a sudden got the national curriculum and everybody feels really worried, and they're like, we need evidence, we've got to do X, Y, and Z, especially if SLT are not on side. But don't panic. You don't need as much as they're telling you. And you can get away with just doing a small amount, because if you know your children, then that is the main thing.
Chloe, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think that is was always the challenge for me. When members, well-intended members of SLT would come and say, come on, they need to be sat down now, they need to be in the books now. And I think back in the day when I was a year one teacher, I didn't have the confidence to challenge and to say, actually, well, this is what we're trying and this is why. It's really important as educators that we do that and that we're confident enough to have those conversations. If you're not, then send your SLT to me or to Chloe and we'll have those conversations.
Send them our way. I'll send a strongly worded email. And Michelle, going back to what you just said about, they want children to be sat down. I haven't got enough chairs in my classroom for every child in the class, because some children would feel more comfortable doing tummy time and writing on their tummy, or sitting on a beanbag with a clipboard. Of course, there are the opportunities there if they need to, but they know their bodies better than I do. And if they feel that their writing is going to be of more quality if they're sat on a beanbag, who am I to say no?
Yeah, that's really interesting, that element of choice, isn't it, that we tend to children tend to lose as they move throughout school and throughout the education system. Thank you so much.
You are so
I
welcome.
could listen to you talk all day. I honestly could. It's just absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
So thank you. Feel free to chip in with the last little bits if you've got something to say as well. People don't want to just listen to me. So as we start to wrap up, I just want you to consider just to have some reflection time. So think about what transition usually looks like in your school, if you've been at your school in the past, if you're not new to your school. If you are new to school, what experience have you had with transition, and how has that looked either on placement or in previous roles? Think about what you definitely want to continue. What works really, really well, bearing in mind that relationships are at the heart of transition. And we know the most successful transitions happen when we develop strong relationships with those children, with their families. Have a think about what you'd like to stop. So in an ideal world, what practices do you think we traditionally do in Key Stage 1 or in that transition to Key Stage 1 that creates barriers, that maybe prevent that relationship with the children flourishing in the way that it should, as soon as it should? And have a think about what you could start doing as well. Is there something new? It might just be that you decide to implement one playful approach to learning each day. If you're starting small, it might be that you decide to go and spend more time in EYFS and explore how learning happens then. Talk to them about how they resource it. It might be that you decide to go and speak to SLT about having additional adults. I know that's a conversation we can probably predict how it would go, but if you don't ask, you don't get. Have a think about how you could approach change, if change is what you want for that transition in September. Okay, so just a few helpful little resources. We have at Twinkl our brand new reception network hub. You can access it by following the link or scanning the QR code. And on there, you can just see on the left, we have our transition hub. So in the transition hub, you can find support, practical advice, research on transitioning to reception, but also transitioning from reception to Key Stage 1. There's also lots of updates, and it changes quite a lot about policy developments, so it's always a good one to keep your eye on. And if you are desperate for any regular updates, or if you have any questions from after today, then feel free to give me a follow on social media, and I'm always happy to answer questions or to get involved in passionate conversations online. So please follow me on Instagram or on LinkedIn. It's been a pleasure today. Massive thanks to Chloe, who has joined us at the end of a very hot and sticky day in the classroom, as I'm sure lots of us can relate to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.